Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to join us. Today we're going to be presenting a webinar entitled The Critical Path and Justification to Self-Filing. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a little history about Blinko Systems and how we got interested in managing the customs process. I think that the background will help give context to what follows. Blinko Systems evolved from one of Canada's largest independent food importers. That organization imported processed foodstuffs for the private labels of most of Canada's grocery retailers and food service distributors. We also imported raw material for Canada's food manufacturers, such as Del Monte, Heinz, Kraft, and others. As importers in the early 80s, we realized that managing the import process fails to deliver the visibility we needed to offer the level and customer service that we desired. The import process was, and still is, very labor-intensive. In order to optimize profitability and deliver customer service, we realized that the only way to achieve these conflicting objectives was to automate the import process as much as possible. In 1982, we began to design a system to support automation of the import process, and in 1989, we commercialized the application as Third Wave and sold it to many small and medium-sized import organizations. Since its introduction in 1989, Blinko Systems has delivered Third Wave customized global supply chain solutions to both large and small enterprises. Our largest client does $4.5 billion in annual revenue, has operations globally, and runs Third Wave in the United States, Canada, and Mexico to manage its supply chain operations. In supporting our clients, we have created solutions that help import organizations automate their import and export customs compliance and enable self-filing, which brings us to where we are today. Problems with compliance is not what a company wants to experience. However, in many organizations, the compliance department is underappreciated or doesn't even officially exist. What we hope to achieve today is to help the import compliance professional understand what is available to allow them to achieve a higher level of responsibility, to be more in control of the import compliance process, and to achieve greater levels of compliance without more work. As the regulatory regime becomes more demanding, compliance needs to be executed more smartly in order for the organization to stay on side. The title of this webinar should really be The Justification and Critical Path to Self-Filing. The reason for the inversion is simple. Most importers and compliance professionals are still locked into the traditional paradigm of using the customs broker to execute their entries, even when self-filing is a clear option, and therefore need to justify, in their own mind, the reason they should consider self-filing before they can set a critical path to achieving a comprehensive self-filing environment. While it is not always the case that every entry will lend itself to self-filing, it is clear that the rationale for staying in the traditional mode is because the importer is very comfortable with the current process, that is, the customs broker or freight forwarder setup, and does not see the justification for making the move. They may be afraid that they do not have the knowledge to adequately manage the import process, or feel that they don't have the resources to be able to execute the process effectively, or even they don't have a simple, clear path to move to a CBP custom self-filing regime. This webinar will focus on understanding the reasons that importers have not yet moved to self-filing, the justification to move to self-filing, and what is necessary to implement a self-filing program. The critical path to self-filing has 4 basic steps. Understanding. The first step is understanding what are the responsibilities of the importer of record in dealing with CBP and PGAs. In 1993, the Modernization Act shifted the responsibility for import compliance directly onto the shoulders of the importer. It introduced the concept of reasonable care with the clear message that the IOR bears responsibility to have in place policies and procedures to ensure they are making reasonable effort to adhere to the CBP and PGA regulatory requirements. Once there is an understanding of the responsibilities under the MOD Act and the concept of reasonable care, you'll be able to better evaluate the role that the customs broker plays in the import process and your relationship with Customs and Border Protection. The second step is justification. There are several key elements that you need to look at in order to justify a switch from using a traditional customs broker to becoming a self-filer. Some of these have hard value and others are softer measures. In order to justify the move to self-filing, it is important to understand how work is done today and how the work will look if you become a self-filer. Not every situation lends itself to self-filing, and not everyone should be a self-filer, although in many cases a hybrid model could be the best solution. The third phase is planning. If you have been able to get your head around the idea of becoming a self-filer, it is important that you have a clear roadmap of how to make the transition from your current environment to the future state, which includes self-filing. It is necessary to look at the role that IT plays in the process, the way work will change, the demands that will be placed on the organization during the transition, and the expected outcomes. Finally, execution. This is probably the most critical stage along the entire path of self-filing. It is at this stage that the organization has to be committed to the process, or else it will potentially come off the rails. Okay, looking a little bit more in depth at the understanding phase. Chances are that you are familiar with the basics of what is required to operate compliantly. However, you should familiarize yourself with these requirements periodically, whether you use a customs broker or not. The fundamentals are easily accessed over the internet at the CBP website. If you have not retained an expert to assist you in complying with customs requirements, you should have access to the customs regulations, Title 19 of the Code of Federal Regulations, the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States, and the GPO publication Customs Bulletin and Decisions. Do you have access to the Customs Internet website, Customs Bulletin Board, or other research services that permit you to establish reliable procedures and facilitate compliance with customs laws and regulations? You should have someone in your organization that is responsible to ensure that each product is properly classified, whether this is done internally or by an outside specialist. Classification is often raised as a concern, and there are classification tools that are available on a pay-for-use basis that will handle most classification challenges with greater than 95% accuracy. Having access to the CBP rulings related to a tariff code is important for items that are not clear-cut and require some more in-depth understanding. This individual should ensure that customs documentation is prepared correctly and completely. If that documentation was prepared by a customs broker, you should have a reliable system in place to ensure that you receive copies of the information submitted to CBP and OGAs and that it is reviewed for accuracy. Any correction should expeditiously be filed with CBP or OGAs. If you use a customs broker or other trade consultant to assist you in understanding and complying with customs requirements, there should be written policies and procedures in place that clearly lay out each party's responsibilities. If you are using a customs broker to execute your filing, you should be providing written instructions as to how they should be clearing the items. The letter of instruction should include the HTS product classification, as well as the other commercial data. The number of times that we have heard that these two basic tenets of reasonable care, the SOPs and letter of instruction, are not in place by the importer is by far much greater than those companies that do. As most of you have likely experienced, CBP does not always treat all products the same way upon entry. This leads to confusion and a lot of wasted cycles. It is important that identical transactions or merchandise are handled the same way at different ports or by different CBP offices within the same port. The CBP Centers of Excellence and Expertise should be going a long way to mitigate this problem, and you should definitely understand the role that they play in helping you, the importer, navigate the customs regime. All right. Customs broker relations. What are the customs broker's responsibilities and services? When we look at a customs broker's services, they fall into two basic areas: administrative and consultative. In most cases, the consultative work is not a line item and is rolled into the customs broker's fees. However, if you are frequently using the CB as a consultant, then they are often charging additionally for their professional services. It is important to understand how you are using the CB so that you can properly evaluate what they really do for you. Administrative fees include preparing entries, ISF and 7501, and POE amendments, reconciliation, and liquidation. Also advancing duties and fees to customs, following up with CBP and OGAs at ports to ensure timely release, following up with carriers, and arranging delivery at port with drayage companies. Their consultative services often include HTS classification, ruling interpretations, CBP and OGA procedures, and policies, procedures, and communication processes. I don't think that anyone will argue that there should be a standard operating procedure clearly articulated, written, easily accessible, and shared among the involved parties. That includes the internal import team, as well as any external customs brokers. Without getting into what the SOPs should look like, I can say that it takes some time to draft, negotiate, implement, monitor execution, review, and update. In my own personal experience and in my interviews with hundreds of compliance specialists, the overriding impression is that this is a very difficult and time-consuming thing to formalize and extremely difficult to correctly implement and manage. This doesn't go away whether you are a self-filer or using a customs broker. In fact, having customs brokers requires that you have a separate SOP that they follow. They are another level of the import supply chain that has to be managed. If I were polling, the questions I would ask is, do you currently have an internal SOP manual and an external customs broker SOP manual in place? Are the SOPs adequately followed? And how often are the SOPs reviewed and updated? Managing the customs broker effectively means that you should prepare for your customs broker comprehensive documentation packages, entry instructions, and establish procedures to audit the customs broker's entries and invoices. Justification. The justification for self-filing will depend on how you understand your responsibility in managing the import process as it relates to CBP and OGAs, the time spent on managing the import customs process, and the costs related to customs and OGA clearance. There are 4 areas to look when justifying the move to self-filing. Number 1, reasonable care. You, the importer, are responsible for reasonable care. You cannot delegate reasonable care. This reminds me of a joke I heard the other day. An employer says to a job applicant, "For this compliance job, we need someone who is responsible." The applicant says, "I'm the one you want. In my last job, every time there was a problem, they said I was responsible." The next justification involves managing the customs import process. The third is assured compliance, knowing that you are compliant with the requirements laid out by CBP and PGAs. And 4, the lower cost. Now, let's look at these areas in greater detail. Reasonable care. Reasonable care covers 5 key elements. The importer must, at the very least, be aware of the customs regulations and what is meant to be informed from a CBP security and customs perspective. Ignorance is not a defense. Importing is a privilege. As the importer, you can delegate the work, but you cannot delegate the responsibility for knowing what your privileges require or how those privileges are exercised on your behalf. The importer must know its products and ensure that they are classified properly. While you can delegate the classification activity to a third party, you cannot delegate the responsibility to ensure that products are classified properly or that the classification is used correctly on your behalf. The reality is that nobody knows the product better than the importer. Yet, in many instances, the importer feels inadequate when it comes to classifying its products. In all instances that the customs broker is used to classify product for the importer, the customs broker relies on the importer for the information necessary to classify a product. Managing reliable product classification and classification usage is a key element of reasonable care. This begs the question, how can the importer be assured that products are classified correctly and the classification is used correctly on its behalf? Next, understanding country of origin rules is a must. If you are an importer dealing in complex manufactured products, having a clear understanding of where the products were manufactured and that they are properly declared for country of origin is the best responsibility of the importer. CBP and PGA declarations containing errors, omissions, faulty statements, incorrect remittances, these are all the responsibility of the importer. Having standard processes, manuals, and review procedures in place to manage the customs brokers and ensure that they are acting in accordance with the directions of the importer is another final requirement of reasonable care, which leads us to look a little more in depth at managing the customs import process. Frankly, the vast majority of organizations are still delegating the relationship with CBP and the import process to the customs broker. I suspect that this is a model that all of you are currently working under. However, today there are options. There are a lot of small, medium, and large organizations that have moved to self-filing with very positive results. But for those that have not yet taken the plunge, the customs broker is an essential part of the import process, and they need to be managed. Until recently, the customs broker was the natural default position because the customs entry process was too onerous, tedious, and complex for the importer to do on its own. It required systems and manpower to execute a simple entry. The information to complete the entry was fragmented across multiple documents and needed to be aggregated, massaged, and formatted to meet CPB's and PGA's specific output requirements. It necessitated that the documents be filed manually with CBP at the port of entry and a relationship built to ensure that the entry was completed or corrected as need be and released in a timely manner. The whole process was manual, very time-consuming, and it was virtually impossible for an importer to do the filing directly. That is all changed today. For the most part, CBP and PGAs have gone digital, and the paradigm has shifted 180 degrees. The importer, with the help of technology, can manage the import process completely without the intervention of a customs broker. When one looks at the work that a customs broker provides, it can be broken down into the two basic functions, filing agent and consultant. These two roles have historically been commingled, and this is reflected in the billing process, where the consultative services are often not charged separately but are presented as a free service. In the current CBP setup, the customs broker's activity can be broken into administrative and consulting services, and fees can easily be segmented. If we separate these two roles, we can see the customs broker differently. As the filing agent, the customs broker role is fundamentally performing a clerical role. In this role, the customs broker is to make sure that all of the required fields on the entry form are filled out correctly. If they are not filled out correctly, the customs broker should file amendments as required. This begs the question, how does the customs broker know when a correction is required or what the correct information is? The answer is most often that the importer has the information and needs to pass the corrected information to the customs broker for filing updates. The customs broker deals with CBP and OGAs if there are physical holds placed on the product so that the release is expedited and costs are mitigated. They communicate with the pier and drayage companies to make sure that the product is moved as quickly as possible from the pier to meet delivery requirements and reduce pier charges. And finally, the customs broker makes payments to the pier or CBP for any charges incurred on the import shipment. As a consultant, the customs broker provides a value-added service. Interpreting customs rules and regulations is a very separate skill set from preparing documents and should be seen as a completely different service. By separating the administrative activity from the consulting services, the importer has greater flexibility to choose the type of consultant they want to provide these types of services. Time and resources is another major factor to consider when using the customs broker. If you are managing the process according to reasonable care standards, you will have created and are maintaining an SOP manual that clearly lays out the relationship between your company and the customs broker. SOP manual management requires that you establish clear SOPs as well as maintain a synchronized product and account database reflecting all the particulars necessary to ensure denied party account compliance and accurate product descriptions and classifications. Another part of managing the customs broker is issuing letters of instruction as to how to handle the processors that are required to execute a filing or interaction with CBP and OGAs on the company's behalf. Then, there is the issue of auditing the broker's entries and invoices. And finally, there is the broker review, which should be done annually, if not quarterly. All of this is very time-consuming. If you have more than one broker, the resources required to manage the import compliance process expands geometrically, if not exponentially. Now, on the flip side to the traditional customs broker relationship is the opportunity to self-file many or all of your entries. CBP now makes it easier than ever to electronically file, and there are systems in place that allow you to quasi-automate or fully automate the filing process with both CBP and CBP-related OGAs. As most of you now know, it is mandated that all PGAs be on the ACE system by December 1st, 2016, so that one entry e-filing will be able to address CBP and PGA requirements. Additionally, CBP's Centers of Excellence and Expertise are now open and centralize and support CBP activity for the importer. All of these steps allow the importer to relatively quickly move to a self-filing regime with equal to or better control and simplicity over the import filing process. The next aspect of justification is assured compliance. The third justification for moving to self-filing is knowing that the current level of compliance that the organization now achieves with its current customs broker will not be degraded, but in fact improved. A key component to achieving assured compliance is automation. There are now solutions available that allow the importer to completely automate the entire import compliance process. This includes a centralized product database with HTS control, full account management capabilities including screening, complete ISF, CBP, and PGA entry filing preparation, auditing and filing capabilities with post-entry monitoring and control. Accuracy is dramatically improved because of the centralized database-driven product and account records. Shipment details are easily imported by spreadsheet templates to ensure that all the data elements are required to support the filings. Auditing of invoices and shipping information is automatically vetted to ensure accuracy and provide visibility into discrepancies on the invoice detail or shipment details. Visibility into the CBP PGA filing statuses is direct. Because automated self-filing is direct with CBP, the importer has immediate access to CBP and PGA status changes. Record management is streamlined, simplified, and flexible. CBP now allows for electronic record management. Automated systems support the electronic collection and filing of all supporting documents associated with the import file. This ensures that records are easily searchable and retrievable in a data-driven environment. And finally, lower cost. The final justification, and certainly not the least important, is the cost factor. Many people that we talk to are concerned about the fact that the customs broker does a lot of work for them, and that if they move to a self-filing regime, they will need to increase staff. They will need to have a licensed customs broker on staff, and the cost will be exorbitant. This fear of filing is one born of misunderstanding of the new opportunities and new ways of managing the filing process. While processes will need to change, and there will be a minor implementation requirement, automation streamlines the process and eliminates the time, effort, and need to manage and audit the broker work and invoices. By automating the processes, the levels of accuracy go up and the ability to respond proactively to entry issues increases. With respect to the need to have an LCB on staff, this is not a requirement or even a practical necessity. What is a necessity is to have someone on staff who's dedicated to understanding the customs regime, the products, and the accounts. They need to know when to use experts to help them with product classification and issues such as dumping and countervail, country of origin determination, and special programs. They need to be able to look at an entry and ensure that it is accurate and reflects the state of CBP and OGA declaration. From a cost perspective, automated self-filing, when it is implemented correctly, streamlines your processes, improves accuracy, improves time to file, filing accuracy, and CBP PGA management. It supports operations in moving product through the import supply chain and lowers customs filing costs by anywhere from 30 to 80%. Now, moving on to the next phase here, next section of our talk is the planning phase. The third stage on the critical path to self-filing, after you have justified the reason and initiated a project, is the planning. This requires significant time and critical thinking in order to envision the future state and understand how it will impact the compliance team and others within the organization. Change for the sake of change is a futile exercise. Having a better system in place to do the same processes and procedures will be of little real value. The first step to get to the future state is to have clearly defined objectives in terms of work processes, manpower requirements, record management, and cost. The future state should not be an extension of the present state in terms of workflow, responsibility, and management. The new self-filing state, when supported with comprehensive automation, should transform the compliance activity and processes from a transaction-based environment to a management and control environment. Without this fundamental shift in mindset, the value to the organization will be limited in scope. It goes without saying that a critical review of the competing solutions is necessary in order to determine what type of solution best suits the organization from a cultural, technical, and philosophical perspective. When selecting the trade compliance application partner, their willingness to be supportive of your needs is no less important than the current customs broker support. Management buy-in is important. This is particularly true at the initial stage when aligning the new compliance vision must be managed and synchronized with the objectives of other disciplines within the organization. However, most often management buy-in wanes over the life of the project, and therefore your selection of a solution partner and their willingness to be supportive of the compliance team's objectives is critically important. As part of reasonable care and informed compliance, having clear, repeatable, and formalized standard operating procedures is a must in order to meet your internal and CBP audits. SOPs are critical whether you are self-filing or not. However, in a self-filing environment, these processes and procedures must be clearly defined and accessible so that the compliance team clearly knows why, what, how, and who is responsible for executing the various tasks and functions. The automated compliance application selected for the future state should go a long way to create the framework for the processes and procedures reflected in the SOP. The final stage in the planning process is aligning the internal resources to the future objectives of the compliance program. A key element for moving to the self-filing regime is the opportunity to reduce costs while improving compliance self-execution. Once the decision to move to a self-filing regime is made, the final step in planning is putting in place a plan to align internal resources, manpower and IT, with the expected future capabilities of the compliance structures. Now, finally, execution. The fourth and last element on the critical path to self-filing is the execution of the plan. While it is simple to understand what is necessary to execute the plan, it is the area that is most often difficult to complete successfully. In most instances, projects get derailed because of the execution of the implementation of the project. While it is impossible to get accurate numbers, different studies conducted over the past 5 years are consistent in showing that the majority, which is 53 to 68% of system implementation, are disappointments. 40 to 45% are outright failures. The main reason is that there is often a poor requirements definition, not clearly understanding the future state, a poor project plan, and or a poor project leadership. While there is no question that choosing the right application to support a self-filing regime is important in order to achieve the stated objectives of the project, disappointment will result if the organization does not take the correct steps to plan properly and execute the journey from current to future state. I'm just going to move to conclusion. Now, just to recap what we've talked about, highlighting the justifications for automated customs compliance and self-filing there are many. As per the 1993 Customs Modernization Act, the importer bears the full responsibility for regulatory compliance, whether they are using a customs broker or not. The importer is responsible for the classifications of goods, for adhering to country of origin rules, and for any errors, faulty statements, poor procedures, and incorrect remittances that may occur. Now, until recently, it was too onerous, tedious, and complex for the importer to do this work on its own. With the arrival of digital technology, including IT-enabled global trade management and the upgrades to CBP's ACE, the importer can manage the import process completely without the intervention of a customs broker, and more efficiently too. Automation streamlines the self-filing process. It improves data accuracy, improves time to file, filing accuracy, and CBP PGA management. This system supports operations in moving product through the supply chain and automated self-filing lowers customs filing costs by anywhere from 30 to 80%. Through the development of understanding and justification, a powerful business case can be made for the implementation of an automated self-filing system. By careful planning and vigilant execution, a successful transition from an outmoded customs broker model to a streamlined IT-enabled system can be achieved. Okay, that's the end of our talk for today. Just want to thank you all again for listening, and have a good day.